Very cool, man. Well, shall we?
We shall. Oh, we shall. Covenants Made
Shall
Simple.
we jump in?
Second to last chapter before we begin reading our next book, Where the Red Fern Grows.
Did we decide? We decided on Truman, right? I need to
Well,
order
that
that.
was
Yeah, I
great.
just started
Do you
reading
guys
that
have
yesterday.
that book already?
I started reading it yesterday,
Okay.
actually, so...
I have read half of it,
Jumpstart.
but don't worry, I've forgotten most of it by
Can
now.
you text me right now and just say Truman?
Yep,
then,
I will do
Remember.
that.
then I will remember to order it because I need to do that.
Sounds good, boss man.
So this is the chapter where Chase becomes Presbyterian.
Not yet.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wait, but we have budget issues,
I
so
know.
we're going to hold off a little bit.
Gosh.
Because of
We're not gonna
budgetary
hit-
issues, I can't convince you of Presbyterianism yet.
Doctor's important, but we got to get the budget in line first.
I was telling you, I saw Trenton, and I was like, hey man, just, maybe you could come back to La Crosse and you could be my office manager, admin.
Yeah.
And I was like, but you do have to wait. because of budget issues, you have to wait. My wife was literally laughing about this morning, where she was just like, for a while, I just prayed that God would provide opportunities for me to just have more young men around that I could disciple, or not necessarily young, but men who are interested in the ministry, and things like that, that we could, at some point work with at Christ Covenant. And it seemed like I meet so many guys now that I'm like, there's so much opportunity for that. But then I was like, I need to stop praying. It's like, there's too many people.
There's too many
guys
people.
that I want.
Now you got to start praying for the funds.
I need
That's
the
right.
money.
Yeah, Lord, bring the funds.
I was like, I just
We
need to
trust
start
in you.
praying for the money for the church that we can.
That's like all I pray for.
Right. That blank blank. Man. All right. So, chapter 10.
Who are the covenant people? That's a
Yeah.
good question.
So, just to start us off, in that first paragraph, he says, Jesus does not save people one by one, only to put them into individually sealed packages like a row of Barbie and Ken dolls on a toy shop shelf. Instead, he binds them as closely to one another as he does to himself. And so this idea of being in covenant with God creates a covenant people, right? I mean, it brings people together. It doesn't separate people.
That's why if you're still watching sermons online, you're not going to church. Just putting that out there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole, we were brought into, like you said, a body, a covenant, a congregation of believers, not, he didn't say, okay, I'm going to preserve this one and then saran wrap it and, like you said, put it on the shelf like Jonty says. You're kind of...
Well, I don't know. The original Greek is a little unclear. Ecclesia can mean watch service from home. So, I don't know.
Watch service online.
What number
There's
is
a possible,
Right,
possible in the semantic range in the
Like-
first century Greek.
Called out ones, it is actually stay home.
That's right.
Stay home
That's
ones.
right.
Stay home ones.
Stay home ones. Staying in.
Stay in ones. Yeah.
That's funny.
A bunch of people are like going on Logos right now, like checking it. Like,
Yep. Pull out the blue letter
Wait a
Bible.
second,
Does it really say
that's
that?
not right.
No, I do love that line though about his closing one that you just read off there, Michael. He binds them as closely to one another as he does to himself. That's just a really sweet thought of I think, just the idea of like adoption and like. I think J.I. Packer was the first person to point out to me how important and how overlooked the theology of adoption is in Christian circles. But then, moreover, he points out in this chapter in Knowing God, like you're not adopted as an only child or a single child. You're adopted into a family of brothers and sisters that now you are called to live with and to love and to care for and to demonstrate the worth and the power of the gospel in your unity with them.
Yeah.
Which
Just to think how that would like be in like just a normal family though, right? Like this idea of, I have my own relationship with Jesus, you have your own relationship with Jesus. What, in a sense, okay, that's true. But if your kids, think about if your kids were so individualized, like your family wouldn't function if it was so compartmentalized like that. Your daughter was like, hey, I have, hey, to her brothers, well, I have my relationship with dad, and you have your relationship with dad. It'd just be weird. There's to not have any cohesion because I have my way of doing things with that, and you have your way of doing things with that.
Yeah.
It's just like, no, that's not how this works. Yes, we all have personal relationship with Christ, but we are also brought into His family, right? That consists of all believers.
Yeah, I wonder if the idea of I don't know, this is a chicken or the egg kind of a thing, but what you do have right now is actually in families, you have that dynamic building more and more, where each person, right? So each child is in most homes, like you've got your own room, you've got your own like things that you do, you've got your own friend groups, you've got all of your own things, and especially with the nature of the way that school mixed with a lot of organized sports, which are not wrong necessarily, but the way that it
if it's soccer,
I mean, right. We all assume
That's an atrocity.
we all assume that Marxist sport was not included.
That's right. But no, individualism,
Well, exactly. There, when you have things where you're each spending almost 100% of the day completely apart in your own things, and even at church, you probably have your own age-based group that you're a part of, and you don't really hang out with or take part in the rest of the worship of the church. You have your own little place, your own little group. And what this actually has done and continues to do is, over time, families are actually they are individualizing, right? They are becoming kind of their own, and it almost is becoming a thing where the only connection is still that, yes, well, I have a relationship with my mom and dad, and you have a relationship with my mom and dad, but there's we have some relationship, but it is minimal compared to what it could be. And so I think it just makes it conceptually difficult for people to understand. However, I also think that people naturally long for and want that, like a covenant, right? Like they want community, they want this is why there's so much draw for things like how often, as a military guy, how often do guys they're able to take part in the kind of brotherhood that you have in the military, and then when they lose that and they don't have that, they're kind of lost and they don't know what to do.
It is weird for sure. I mean, just coming out of the military, I didn't realize when I transitioned out of the military how strong that connection was. Again, not that there's a lot that I did not agree with, with the guys I worked with, like their worldviews and stuff. But I think the things we did naturally brought us together. Like the difficult, hard things we did naturally brought us close together. And you had that sense of belonging, community. You wore the same uniform, you had the same haircuts. You kind of spoke the same language. And then to leave that, and then it was harder than I thought it was going to be. I didn't realize how much it would affect me.
Right.
But yeah, because like you said, we all do long for that sense of community. And unfortunately, even it's so ironic because the thing that's pulling us away from actual flesh and blood community is our desire for community online.
Yeah.
Which is it's still the desire for community, but it's actually having the opposite effect of what we want it to have.
Yeah.
It's we're trying to win the approval and the friendship of people that we'll never actually interact with and face to face or actually meet, and then at the same time we're sacrificing the people that are all around us that God's put in our lives, and it's kind of ironic and sad. It's we're searching for community while it's staring us in the face. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. Yeah, so he goes on to point out that this is under the section of Jesus, one body. That there's different denominations, and sometimes there's reasons for that. But from God's point of view, there's only one church, the Presbyterian Church.
Here we go.
Oh wait, okay, he didn't. Okay, I just misread.
That's
that
not
part.
yet. That happens later.
I did write it in myself.
Oh, that is my handwriting.
Oh yeah.
Sorry about that.
He doesn't say that, but he infers it. In,
good and necessary consequence.
In quoting Ephesians, it's just assumed that that's what he meant.
Right.
Good and necessary consequence.
No, but it was helpful to think about, from God's point of view, you do have His one people, right?
Yeah.
Like there is good reasons. Like actually, the very idea of denominationalism is the idea that hey, we still have some kind of connection to each other. We just have disagreements that like we probably can't operate, on the day-to-day level together.
Right.
But we're actually not saying we're divided, right? Sometimes it's said, well, Protestantism, well, you've got all these denominations.
Right. That's the
No, denominationalism is actually founded to say, hey, we're actually still in the same faith. We still have that kind of unity.
Yeah.
But on the more day-to-day practical level, we actually have to. We just can't practically work together. At least not yet.
Yes.
And so it's at least a way that we can maintain a certain level of connection.
Do you feel like that's practiced well when there are a number of denominations who would call themselves Christian denominations with whom you wouldn't participate in fellowship, whether that's Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or even some of the more extreme liberal cases of denominations? Do you think as Christians we should be clear in our brotherly support of other denominational churches which we would partner and link arms with, and if so, how do we do that practically?
That is such a good question, and I don't know how to do it right.
Sure.
I don't know how to do it well. I do think that it would be good. I actually do think that there's some. This is a problem. Is that usually ecumenical work is almost always done in the direction of getting to the least common denominator. Almost hey, we're just gonna not we're gonna try to blur the lines or something like that.
Yep.
And probably part of it is that today most people are unable to actually be friends with or friendly with people that they disagree with.
Sure.
Right? Everything's taken on a personal level in a way that, and probably just because we're all so insecure about what we believe.
Yeah. Well, you think I'm stupid if you don't agree with what I believe.
Right.
Yeah. You must. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's just everything is taken personally. And that's, I don't think that that's healthy or good or right.
Yeah.
But it's also not good to then, within that, kind of more ecumenical, hey, let's all try to work together kind of world. It's well, we're just going to soften in all kinds of ways, right? So when I go to pastor groups or something, and you've got people that this guy denies the Trinity. He's not a believer, right? That's number one,
right? Yep.
That's number one. What makes us what we are,
right?
And so part of the problem is that too, that just the walls have just broken down completely,
right?
Yeah. But then there are things maybe issues, differences in understanding the sacraments, which we'll talk about in this chapter, or other things like that are very important. On a local church level, that you have a kind of unity, even denominationally, I think is important. But you can do a lot of the ministry of the church with others who you disagree with on this level, right? That is not actually at the heart of things, right? This is not Apostles' Creed level, and so. I think that's what makes it difficult, is just those blurred lines. If there was a way that we could work it where it was hey, look, we're very firm and clear in what we believe. We're not, we're not budging on it at all.
Right.
We've drawn really hard lines, but there are places that we can work together and show the unity of faith, even across those lines. I think about, work in the area of trying to end abortion or things like that. Hey, what if we all started to work together really intentionally in a unified way here? That could be done, I think. I think that could be done. But it almost always goes to the doctrinal level, well, let's just figure out. And if I'm honest, so one of my thoughts on this, you just got me off on a tangent.
So sorry.
But one of my thoughts on this is actually that pastors are usually the people that are trying to lead this and do it. I actually don't know that pastors are the right people to do that. Because part of the job of a pastor is to be the keeper of the line, right? To be the keeper of the boundary. And so that's not something that, it's not that you can't as a pastor work with other pastors or something. It's just that when it comes to the level of actual ministry, like you have to be firmer on the line than other people necessarily have to be.
Yeah.
But when it comes to more like lay ministry, when it comes to some of these things like, trying to end abortion or, or something like that, then it's like, I feel like that can so easily be done. And especially by lay people in the church, that you could show that kind of unity of faith across church lines without it being like, we have to agree doctrinally to do this. But anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's,
I think it's important, like you said, to make the distinction between who says they're Christians and whose actual actions and beliefs match up with biblical Christianity, right? Which is kind of a redundant term, but because there's people that will, like you said, you mentioned, like, well, people that say they're Christians, but like the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, those clearly are not, those people are not actually Christians, even though they say it.
Sure.
They say that, we're just another subgroup of Christians. Like, no, you're not. You deny basic biblical doctrine. So it's like, that's not a denominational thing. That's clearly a belief versus non-belief. Liberal Christians. I mean, there's a church downtown here that plasters the rainbow flag all over their front window. It's like, you're not Christians, right? You cannot sit there in good conscience and be like, we follow Christ, but we reject what His Word clearly says in this, and this point, right? And you're a church in name only, right? You're not. So there's a difference between that and then, someone that, hey, we disagree on Calvinism, we disagree on baptism, we disagree, some other secondary issues, but we're still, like you said, it's an Apostles' Creed issue. We're unified on that. Like, we could go out on the street corner, shoulder to shoulder, and preach the same gospel. Like, that's different. Right? So, like, we could be unified with them. Again, it might not work on a day-to-day level, right? Like, those guys probably wouldn't be co-elders at the same church, right? Just because they disagree on those things, and those are important. But on on those fundamental things, there definitely can be unity, and I think I have plenty of friends that I disagree with on those issues, and like I would not hesitate to consider them brothers in Christ. So, I mean, we don't agree on baptism, Chase. So.
Well, we did 5 months ago.
We did 5 months ago, and then I flip-flop.
I'm currently a Baptist, but we all know where this is going.
I keep flip-flopping, but it's like we're unified. Like, we're brothers in Christ. We're sitting here talking about this, and it's like we disagree on a secondary issue. But yeah, but like what you said, Michael, I think was spot on. Like, there's things we can go and we can link arms with, but maybe like some things, like you said, like would we be elders of the same church board? Probably not. But
I think what makes it hard for people is that like they don't know how to handle. Again, we just don't know how to handle having true, close relationship to somebody that we do have fundamental disagreements with.
Yeah.
And I know that there are lines, and probably for everybody, the lines are a little bit different in that way, right? Like who you're even just able to get along with and continue in relationship with. And obviously it's hard. For instance, if I know somebody that has fundamental like disagreements on really important things, right? I've got a lot of, Roman Catholic friends or things like that where it's like, actually, on the most fundamental things, we actually agree, right?
Yes.
Again, like Apostles' Creed level stuff, Nicene Creed, like we can get there. But also, like there are things that are just outside of that, right? Like that are, they're not so outside of it that I think you can't be saved, but they're close enough that I'm concerned about a lot of what you do and what is central to your practice.
Yes.
And like that can be hard, right? But like we can still be really dear friends. But the friendship can't actually be built around those things.
Right.
At least not usually, right? Like it can't be. We can disagree and we can learn how to disagree well. But what often happens is you try to build unity around the things you're not unified in.
Yeah.
And you can't actually do that. That's not actually, at least not where it can start. Yeah. Maybe you can grow to be, unified in other ways, but it has to start with, hey, where are we? Where are we in together, right? Where are we together? Where are we in the foxhole together?
Yeah.
Not shooting at each other. Let's start there,
Yeah.
and then see where this goes, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway.
Nice. Well, important, of course, we know to love people from other denominations, other local churches, but also the point of this chapter seems to center quite a bit on loving the people within your own church. On 147, I love John T. closes the second to last full paragraph there. Don't kid yourself that you love the church, or even that you love Jesus, if you're not prepared to love the particular people he has put you in fellowship with. Whew. Sizzling.
Well, but I am the church because I'm a believer, and so as long as I love myself,
That's right. That's right. Where one are gathered. Just like
When me, myself, and I are gathered.
Yeah.
right? Me, myself, and I. That's three.
That's three, right?
Two or three.
Two or
That's
three.
the Trinity, right? That's
Oh my gosh.
Ooh, here we go. Here we go.
And it's
Welcome to
over.
modern.
Like, we just-
Welcome to modern American.
Oh, Chase just got zapped. He's gone.
he's gone.
God fried him.
Oh man. And
Yikes.
the people rejoiced.
Yes. Yes.
And the people rejoiced.
Righteously so.
Yeah. No. He's. He talks about the how in Scripture, the church is spoken of as both the
Right.
universal church, right? All
Catholic,
believers, the Catholic Church.
Yep.
But also individual congregations
Particular
are called that,
assemblies,
right? Like
yeah.
they can be referred to in the same way.
Right.
And that's I think this is a huge,
Yeah.
a hugely important way to understand Scripture, that you have within the individual local community,
Right.
in a sense, the whole, right? It's
Right.
not the whole, but in a sense it is, right?
Right.
It is like that.
Right. Yeah, and I'm trying to remember. He makes that argument just for listeners who don't have the book. He references in Paul's letters. He doesn't refer to like Corinthian, you part of the church, or Ephesian, you part of the church, but rather when he sends out his epistles, he does say you as the church, using the term almost comprehensively, which
Yes.
helps us to understand. Yeah, we can use this term both and.
Yeah.
Right.
I was a little bit convicted on 148. Following that last thought, he writes about how easy it is for us to segregate particular people who are, he says, less socially able, less intelligent, less wealthy. We effectively say get lost. Yet these are the people to whom Jesus was happy to unite himself. He the real gut punch. Are we honestly going to look at a part of Jesus' body and say, not good enough for me? Imagine Jesus walks into a room. Would you dare look at him and say, Jesus, great to meet you at last, but I don't like your ears. And for that matter, that nose is pretty hideous. That is effectively what we're doing when we subtly cut off people in our congregations who we don't instantly take to. If Jesus welcomes them, so should we. After all, we have no more right to be in covenant than they do.
Yeah, that's good, man. It's hard for us, especially on that level of, well, if I personally don't like some, like if we're not going to be friends, right? I'm not going to.
Right. If we don't share other
wanna
interests.
spend a lot of
Yeah.
time with them or hang out with them or invite them over. Then we can't. How am I supposed to be covenantally tied to them in the church?
Yep.
And yet that is actually exactly
Precisely
what the church is
yes.
for.
Yep.
What you're called to, and very often this is why God provides people in the church. All of us know people in churches that we've been a part of that are like, they're really hard.
Yep.
But
Extra
they're
grace
hard
required.
to deal with and figure out, and like I don't want to spend a lot of time with them.
Right.
And usually, especially if you feel that way, God will actually make you.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yep,
he just does.
100%,
He will
100%.
make, like, that person will for some reason really like you probably
Right.
and want to spend time with you, or
Yep.
they'll whatever. I don't. God works in different ways, but
Right.
it does seem like he goes out of his way to do that.
Yeah.
This is one of the dangers in when you have a church that caters to maybe particular groups, particular
Demographics and such,
demographics.
yeah.
Like it can turn into, and this is particularly true of those churches that have a lot of younger people, because generally speaking, younger people they're just more cliquish, right? So like a college age, young adult groups of people tend to be more cliquish, tend to be more like, well, if we don't like somebody, we can't
Right.
love them and spend time with them.
Right.
Actually, you can, and it's not maybe the most fun thing you've ever done, but actually you grow to like it.
And it's
over time,
sanctifying.
you know?
Yeah. Yep.
It's sanctifying, and you grow to actually like people
Right.
when you devote yourself to them, and you know
Yeah.
when you start with love. I think C.S. Lewis says something about this. This is more general, I think, but he just has a bit about this idea that sometimes you basically have to fake it. Like sometimes you have to just start acting as if you love somebody,
Right.
And what you're going to find out is you'll come to love them, right?
Right.
But you have to start by trying to be obedient.
This
first
sounds like the four
sometimes.
loves to me. Yeah.
It probably
yeah.
is.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, on that note of God oftentimes bringing in those extra hard to love people, I feel like that's the role I've played for both of you, so you're welcome for that. God keeps thrusting Chase upon
I thought you were saying the other way, right? Like both of you are so hard. Yeah, I hang out with two guys every week that I don't like.
They're insufferable.
Pulling teeth, but trying to be sanctified, trying to grow in sanctity.
Oh, nice.
47. He talks about it's relatively comfortable to accept that you're united to Christ, to Paul, to Luther, even to Christians thousands of miles away in another country. The great thing about Luther is that he's rather unlikely to want help decorating his lounge or pop round. That's definitely British. Pop round.
Pop around.
Pop round. No, pop round, not pop round. Pop round. For a chat when you're dying to have a quiet night in. And it's so true. I think about it. We're so apt to be like, oh man, John Calvin, Martin Luther, like, man, these guys. But honestly, if we were like in their congregations in real life, there's probably times where like I held beliefs, and probably even now, that some of those guys would want to see me dead.
And on a personal level, like you wouldn't like Luther.
Yeah,
I think I would. I think
he was pretty fun, but
He's
but
so
if I was on the receiving end of
But probably not, right?
Some of his writing,
it
would probably not go well.
I'm German enough that I think maybe I would enjoy him, but like if you're not,
Yeah.
that guy was really German.
Or if you're even a little bit Jewish, you could be in trouble.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things that you wouldn't like him, but it's easy to pretend. Like the perfect church out there is, the Reformers, or is, this
It would have
whatever
been
it is
Calvin's
somewhere
church in
else.
Geneva or whatever. But it's like, but it's easy to say that when like I can grab him off my shelf,
Right.
read him, and then put it back and only touch it when I want to.
Right.
Where it's like,
You're in total control.
You're in total control
Yes.
of my interaction with these dead men. Oh, praise God for them, right? Like, praise God for a lot of these men, but I'm in total control of my interaction with them.
Yeah.
Whereas, what about the people that are like right in front of me right now? It's like there's an element where like I can't control my interaction with them, and like I think that sometimes bothers us and annoys us.
Yeah,
for sure.
Which is a problem.
That's
because we're not in control.
You brought
we
up
have
the
to realize-
online, like
Yes.
trying to find online community.
Exactly.
And I actually do think that there's a way in which like the internet can connect you with people that otherwise you might feel alone, or you might feel like, man, I can't find anybody that's that has similar beliefs, right? Like the internet was massive when it came to bringing a lot of us into the Reformed world, right? So like we never would have been connected to this without it. However, if it just stays there,
Right.
so in other words, it can have a helpful effect, but when you try to just build community, quote unquote, or you say like, well, my people are the people online, it's the same thing as with a book or something like that.
Right.
You have
You
total
control the
control.
access.
You can just turn it off. You can just stop talking to somebody. You can just disappear, and you can create a persona of yourself that, and almost always you will, because to know somebody truly, you have to know them directly. You have to know them in a way that you see all of them.
And it's basically costless as well when it comes to that. For like, what does it cost? And if it does cost you anything, like you said, I can exit the window, I can close the tab. Like, it doesn't come at any sacrifice to you. Yep.
Good.
Yeah.
So he talks about the different forms of church government.
Circles,
like
chains, and pyramids.
Yep, independent, Presbyterian, Episcopal. So he describes the independent churches as if they're kind of like a circle, right? So although they may have connections to other churches, they can just be totally, right? There's no authority, there's no, accountability. So they can just cut that off, right? If they wanted to. So it's like they are kind of the church as an individual church. To a kind of extreme. Presbyterianism, he kind of speaks of as a kind of chain. So there's links, but there's still like you are your own entity, right? You've got your own kind of piece of the chain, However, it is linked to more than just that, right? So that you have both of those elements. And then the Episcopal being more like a pyramid, he said. So there is a unity, there is a connection, but it's also a connection that like is not you don't actually have any kind of autonomy is not the right word, but like you think about the image of a circle or a link in a chain, and this is something that it's got its own piece, right? Like it is on its own in a sense. It is full and total in and of itself without something outside of it. Whereas with the Episcopal form, you don't. I mean, if you're not under a bishop or archbishop, like you're not in the church, right? Like that's how you define what it would be to be connected.
But it's not a pyramid scheme.
But it's not a pyramid. It's not a pyramid.
It's not a pyramid scheme.
Ask him
It's top down. Top down. It's not a pyramid scheme. Episcopalians are just one big pyramid scheme.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. We do have Anglicans listening, so be careful.
I apologize. I'm sorry.
Yeah, come on.
I am
Jeez.
sorry.
Some of our main listeners.
Can we still be unified, please?
Oh, that's good. Yeah. So he obviously argues for Presbyterianism with the idea it's true, there are bishops, elders, teachers, pastors mentioned in Scripture, but those terms are used interchangeably. He mentions Acts 20, Titus 1 especially, where you have clearly the qualifications for an elder, and both the word for bishop and elder are used in the same list as if they're the same person. And so we can take from that these are actually the same thing. And then he talks also about how there's also at the same time this the Acts 15 kind of situation where you have all of the elders with the apostles coming together to make decisions that will affect everybody. And so somehow you have to fit those two things together, right? You've got to and this is after the church has begun to grow outside of Jerusalem, right? It's not just as if it was like, well, as long as it's one city or something like that. And they're still, maybe they're like, they were like a mega church with like satellite campuses, but they came together for an Easter service.
That's right.
Like, no, this was actually, there were churches outside of that. There were a lot of churches. Also did not have things like satellite.
Wait, what? Brief aside on that, by the way, man. So every now and then on my social media, I'll be flicking through reels or whatever, and I'll see a Mark Driscoll thing come on there because his social media seems more popular now than it was before.
It's getting bigger, man.
And you know what's weird? Increasingly so. Every time that I flick past a Mark Driscoll reel now, I see it'll say at the bottom of my screen, more of my friends follow him than the last time, and I'm just like, do you know about? Are you familiar?
Dude, it's going to be even more.
So weird.
Especially within the like he's an incredible marketer. He really is.
Yes.
Really, really good at marketing, and he does have his finger on the pulse of things. This is something that Matt and I talk a lot about, but particularly for young men, there's going to be more and more guys who are following him because of the kind of stuff he's saying, because he's doing it to appeal to them.
Right.
Like he did that in the kind of punk rock Seattle, he rebel against authority side of things, and then everything fell apart, and now he's doing it again in the more like red pilled, like we need to be.
Have you two done a reaction video? You and Matt done a reaction video yet to the video of him from a recent service where he was just like talking about the conflict in Israel and like the lamb and the lion? He's coming back this time. He's got his old school Mark Driscoll grit and everything behind his. Have you guys reacted to that yet?
We did a whole episode on that whole sermon, so we listened to the whole sermon.
Oh, now I have to go back and listen to the reaction now. Okay,
you have to go check it out.
So good.
It was really bad.
Yes. Oh, that does not surprise me.
It was really bad, but also it's clear why it's appealing to people and why people are looking for this kind of thing.
Sure.
But no, he's getting in. He's like we have this theory that he's basically just trying to work his way into a position on the Blaze media, like he's trying to get his own show. So he started to just do a lot of that kind of stuff, right? Like right-wing personality type talk.
I did see somebody comment on that video, and they said if you close your eyes, it sounds like Alex Jones. Yeah. that's what it sounds like. Just his inflection and just everything behind it.
He actually does have a lot of that too. Yeah,
hilarious.
That's interesting. That is interesting.
But anyways, I thought of that. Sorry, satellite churches being in Act 15, tuning into this conference.
This is restless, so you always
can make those
always
connections.
go back. What do you guys think of his, Chase being from
Oh boy.
like a independent, free evangelical congregation, us kind of coming out of that? Like, do you think he gave a fair shake to the different positions? Explaining it well.
I mean,
You take any beef with the way he kind of presented everything?
I don't want to. I think I want to be careful on this particular chapter, not to try to represent something I haven't studied super well.
Fair.
That said,
just curious your take. But
no, I appreciate that. That said, on this particular topic, it does feel like the EFCA, so that's the denomination I'm affiliated with, which, frankly, in terms of like Baptistic denominations, I'm actually a pretty big fan of compared to a couple of the other ones next to it.
So I grew up in the Free Church too.
Yeah.
We have. I'm sure we'll have folks listening that are either still in the Free Church or
or have
connected
some
to it. And so huge fan overall for sure.
To that extent, of course, the EFCA really does push autonomous churches. That's whenever they're like describing what free means, that's what they say. And so, to that extent, we see the circles that Rose writes about. But also, I think there are some chain link aspects to the way that the EFCA drives itself as well.
Well, I think I've noticed that, there is definitely congregations that are kind of out there and like it's us against the world, which can be problematic. But I think for the most part, like the EFCA and other, free denominations like that, I would say they still try to do, or even like the SBC, they're like, we're autonomous congregations, but they even try to like, they recognize that they need to have some sort of link to other
structure, some authoritative, right.
They do, not that they have a Presbyterian form of government.
Sure,
but they still
but they
recognize.
Know they should. They feel it. Like,
they have these oversight
committees. It's like baby dedications. Like, we know that.
We just did that this last week.
But I mean, there's that sense of like, hey, like we are, even though like we hold to the conviction that each congregation should be like autonomous and stuff. But we still recognize that we need the other local congregations,
right.
So, which is
and
important.
that's great, right? And it's super important. And I do think like the Free Church does a better job at this than some. And obviously, you have the extremes of maybe certain, like.
Well, I even think of just the two biggest churches in the city in which we reside are both free churches, and they're very different in how they practice these models.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and you'll have that, right? And you'll have, even when you're trying to have a connection, when you I think he does a good job in the sense that, like, he does, like, the ideal in an independent church, like, it's not seen as a bad thing that you're a circle, right? Like, it's not seen as, like, a negative that, no, we are autonomous, right? Like, we can be autonomous fully. That's not seen as like a negative thing. And so when he describes it in those ways, that it's like a kind of in and of itself alone, like it can have connections, but it doesn't have to, right? To be what it's supposed to be. That's actually just how you would describe it, right? Like and it's actually seen as a value in a lot of these circles. Now I do think, especially as time goes on, what happens in a denomination is there's usually more and more recognition that you need a deeper connection. So I think this is happening in the Free Church. And like when you think about historically how something like the Free Church forms and how it, coming out of state churches and like trying to be like, no, we need some of that autonomy, where there's not that 100% direct kind of authority that is much more Episcopal, right? So especially coming out of Lutheranism, Lutheranism is more Episcopal, although it's kind of a mix in different ways. But it does have some more Episcopal kind of characteristics. Like trying to move out of that, you can understand how the emphasis would be on, no, we need more autonomy. And then especially the Free Lutherans kind of met up with, the Baptists, especially in the kind of D.L. Moody kind of era, you see how this would happen. But especially as time goes on, as the church matures, I think you just recognize, we need more connection, we need more oversight, and kind of be like, Derek, we need more, like of that. So even I think in the Free Church, it seems like there is more of we need more, like the denominational office all of a sudden has a little bit more to do with reaching out to churches that people have concerns with or things like that. That there is more and are trying to do more, right? And instilling like, hey, let's get our pastors together more regularly for different times to connect and work together. So anyway, I think you see that over time. It's like, I mean, how many churches start off as like, hey, we're going to be a house church?
Yeah.
And it seems like this ideal that, especially when you're young, you're like, whoa, this will be great. Everybody's a part of it, and we're all... Because it's like you and your buddies, right?
Right.
It's you and your friends.
It's going to be perfect. What could possibly go wrong?
We all agree so well.
And if you don't blow up or become a cult, which is like,
pretty common,
50-50. What happens over time is you're actually like, oh, we probably could use greater connection, whether it be locally or just more. And so usually you end up joining a denomination of some kind because you're like, we need more help. And so I think it just comes with maturity, realizing that need.
And things like the SBC or whatever, like they say, oh yeah, we're a group of autonomous churches that cooperate together or whatever, but they still have a Baptist faith and message that they all have to agree to. We even saw like this last year, like Saddleback Church and Elevation Church, I think Elevation left after the controversy with Saddleback, but there was like a whole thing about Saddleback and what they were doing and how it was inconsistent with the Baptist faith and message, and then they were disfellowshipped, right? So it's like you still had that as much as they say, we're not a denomination, well, you still kind of had that like, hey, here's a standard that we all hold to, and you're not holding to it. Like, you need to get in line, or we're not going to get in line with that. Okay, then we have to disfellowship.
Which is so weird because Rick Warren made such a good case at the SBC. It's so good.
He did good
then
job.
Mueller comes up and just
millions of pastors.
Yes, thank you for reminding us of that, Rick. He's the best.
Where are all those millions of pastors? We should have a lot more churches right now.
Mueller has trained his thousands.
Yeah, that's right.
Warren his millions.
There it is.
The song of the people.
The Father, the Son, and the Rick Warren.
Oh man, so good.
Yikes.
All right. So the question he comes to is just then how can you tell who are members of this one covenant community, right? Yes. So moving on from how it's structured on the greater level, how do you actually tell who's in and who's out? And so this is where we get into baptism, and he talks a little bit about the visible.
Chase just flipped the table, so right in the middle of the coffee shop.
Classic.
Everyone's
classic. Man, of course he starts by talking about circumcision, right? Looking back to the Old Testament, it was meant to be a sign of having faith, therefore having been justified, the physical sign of the spiritual reality.
Yes. Yeah, and so this is true in the Old Covenant, and this brings him to talk about the visible versus invisible, that even in the Old Covenant, you have clearly this reality where there are people who are in Israel but not of Israel, right? Like they are covenantally a part of the people, covenantally even tied to God, right? They are a part of the worship. They are they're held to the standard and laws of everybody else, and yet their heart was far from the Lord. Which is why Moses has to say at times, you need to be circumcised of heart, right? You need to. This actually has to penetrate the heart. It's not enough to simply be physically circumcised or something like that. And so you have that element of, okay, somebody could be visibly a part of the covenant people of God, but not have the reality that sign signifies. And it's still serious, right? If that person leaves it, it's still serious that they are called to believe. But it's not. That's not everything, right? It's not. It's not everything. So he says, this is on page 153. Before the new covenant, he says, anyone who was physically descended from Israel, another name for Jacob, was in one sense a member of the people of God. But of course, many of them didn't believe. So in another sense, they were not truly a part of the covenant community. So, and you see that throughout, right? You see that throughout the Old Testament. Those kinds of things happen.
Yeah, here I have some verses that I got pulled up. So Deuteronomy 30, verse 6. Moreover, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, so that you may live. Deuteronomy 10:14-16. Behold, to the Lord your God belong heaven and the highest heavens, the earth and all that is in it. Yet on your fathers did the Lord set his affection to love them, and he chose their descendants after them, even you above all peoples, as it is to this day. So circumcise your heart and stiffen your neck no longer. Finally, Jeremiah 4:4. Circumcise yourselves to the Lord and remove the foreskins of your heart, men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, or else my wrath will go forth like fire and burn, and none to quench it, because of the evil of your deeds. And so we see this sense where all those verses are talking to circumcised people, right? They're talking to Jewish people. But there was a sense that, hey, your physical circumcision needs to reflect an inward reality of the circumcision of your heart. You know, the physical circumcision in no way is effective to circumcise the heart. That needs to happen, and that's ultimately it's Christ who does that for people. But you know, there was that sense of like, you know, you don't harden yourselves. Be circumcised of heart. You know, don't just say, you know, like the Pharisees are. Was it Jesus' condemnation of the Pharisees, or maybe John the Baptist was like, you know, don't say we have Abraham as our father. You know, he's able to,
John 8.
Yep. You know, he's able to raise sons of Abraham from these stones, right? It's not enough to just be like, oh yeah, we have the covenant sign and seal. Like physically, it's like it needs to be a spiritual reality. Right?
Yeah, well, the Rhodes uses that to then create 3 categories in the new covenant, and he calls them non-Christians, so people who don't even purport to be Christians, people who aren't in churches, they're non-Christians. He says there is such a thing as covenant keepers, who are the people who genuinely profess faith and like I say,
have the
yes,
spiritual reality that points to.
But then, of course, finally he uses that other category, which it sounds like my Presbyterian friends would call the visible church, who are not part of the invisible church, and this is the covenant breaker, is the nomenclature Rhodes chooses to use, and that would refer to the people in Hebrews 6 that appear by all measurable standards to be a part of the body, and yet on the last day will be proved to have not been.
Yeah, I was really struck actually thinking about where he mentions, you know, like somebody could be a part of the visible people of God and be a Judas, right? So like clearly walking with Christ, being given the commands of Christ, even doing miracles, because of the relationship that he has to Christ outwardly, while all the while being one who was going to betray, one who was stealing, one who was a thief. And even communing with him in the sense, like, I mean, he quite literally receives communion. And yet, there's that warning. And what it just made me think is the importance of warning people as they come to the table of the Lord, as we partake of the Lord's Supper, using that as an opportunity to warn people, which we do, you know, usually anyway, when we do the Lord's Supper, but it just made me think.
Quick question on that. Do you guys practice members-only communion or no?
No, so we have, we practice what is it's not a closed communion completely where it's only members.
Right.
But we do fence the table in the sense that we tell people, hey, if you're a professed believer and you've been baptized and you're not under some kind of discipline that says you shouldn't come to the table, you can come.
Enjoy.
Even if you're not even if you're not a member of our church, that's okay. But if you're not those things, then you shouldn't come.
It's dangerous.
It is dangerous, and it actually is to eat and drink judgment upon yourself.
Right.
And that's, you know, I just thought of that in a way that, you know, I've thought of that before, and I've even used, you know, the story of Judas as a warning at the table. But for whatever reason, in reading this morning, right before you guys came, I was just really struck by it, just really hit by that reality. Like, like just thinking about, I've thought, there's a great song called Iscariot by a band they were called Bison. I think they changed their name to The Last Bison, and I'm not sure.
I can remember your brother played nonstop. What's the song that was on nonstop for a summer? Switzerland?
Switzerland, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Great song, right? Great song.
Okay.
So I recently was reacquainted with this band and thought about them again and listened to them.
We're the last Bison. We're not Bison. We're the last.
There's a song called Iscariot that they have that's all about Judas, and it's and much of it is you know, there's kind of a refrain in it, for instance, that says you know, where you have this. You have to go listen to it. I don't know that you can find it except on YouTube. Maybe you can find it elsewise.
I'm not seeing it on Spotify.
Because I think they stopped playing it or they kept it away. It's intense. And it's the kind of thing that I could imagine as a band gets more popular, that they're like, oh, we don't really want people listening to that one anymore. But it's phenomenal. It's their best song, hands down.
It is not.
Go on YouTube.
I'm on YouTube.
Yep,
it is not on any of their own
It's not.
stuff.
No.
It's like a
Somebody
bunch of like
has it.
random
Yes.
background. So I'm screenshotting and I'll listen to it later.
No,
but
seriously,
yeah.
listen to it. So I listened to the song, and seriously, it will like make me weep. I was listening to it recently. I was just reminded of this band, and I found this song because I remembered it, and I was making lunch with a couple of my kids, and I just started to weep. And my son Hatton loves this song. He heard it. He just really liked it, and he was asking me about
Just
it.
for, like, the
what's
melody
it
and the
about?
tune, or-
Yeah,
okay.
the melody and the tune is really strong, and it's beautiful. But there's this sense throughout of both like there's like an element of joy, but it's all somber, like it's all dark.
Yeah.
And so it's the chorus goes, Iscariot, Iscariot, the devil has you now. You're set up for betrayal. Iscariot, Iscariot. And there's this refrain where it is basically Christ saying, I have used your unbelief to set my people free. So die now, my Judas. And in the song he says, my Judas. And not to say it's clear, like he's the villain.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I did think, like in listening to this, I thought about Christ communing Judas, right?
Right.
Like here he is, having been with Christ for 3 years,
Right.
having done all this, Jesus all the while knowing that this
Right.
is the one
Right.
who's going to betray me. And thinking about how he washes disciples' feet,
Mm-hmm.
and he washes Judas's feet.
Right.
And just thinking about those moments in the song too, it says, at one time it has the line that your kiss tastes like a crown of thorns. It's a strange.
Are they a Christian band?
They were Christians.
Oh, I understand.
Of some kind.
I see.
I don't know what
where that
very
went,
right.
yeah.
Very possibly they continued to be, and very possibly they got more popular and didn't.
Gotcha. Or
Which is-
deconstructed or whatever. Yes,
Right,
yes,
I don't
sure.
know. So I don't know if they continued or not, and
Okay.
so hopefully they did.
Yeah, it would be cool.
But that song, I think, is actually phenomenal.
Awesome.
In representing well the heart of Christ, even toward Judas, and in just a beautiful, poetic way.
Awesome.
I was just struck by this, thinking about Christ clear. Like there is an element, clearly, of connection, of attachment, of love, and yet this is a covenant breaker, right?
Yeah.
This is one who is going to betray him. And clearly, Paul uses that motif later on to talk about those who eat and drink judgment on themselves, right? That becomes, I think, just instilled in the fact that, hey, you can take communion and not be receiving the spiritual reality that it points to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is really good. I've only got 10 minutes before I need to leave. I've got another meeting on the other side of town. But here was a question I wanted to ask you, Paedo Baptists. Just curious here.
You guys.
You just say Christians.
Yes. So you evolved state of Christians. Riddle me this. So, he on page, I think it was 153, uses 2 Peter 2:1. And he references, it says, even denying the master who bought them. This is about the false teachers, the wolves here, or false prophets specifically. And he points out that the master had bought them. And I, like a good Christian, BLB'd this thing. I looked at the Blue Letter Bible. Sure enough, no dispute about it. Everywhere this is used in the New Testament, this is purchased. It's bought.
Yeah.
And this is what Rhodes uses this later as like a formative argument for which a Presbyterian can say confidently, yeah, we can baptize people not knowing whether or not they're going to persevere as Christians. And just look at this. Here's the thing, though, that I'm curious on your thoughts on. We just talked about definite or limited atonement a couple weeks ago. How does that wrestle with this? Because I was just informed, and of course I do believe this, but I was just informed that Christ's blood certainly saves the people. It doesn't maybe save the people. So help me understand why that's not counter to this from a Presbyterian's perspective, saying this is how we remedy this to infant baptism.
Yep. So this is why he brings up that distinction between the visible and invisible church. That there is a sense in which Christ, even through his blood, has purchased a visible people, is in covenant with a visible people. But that the ultimate reality, when we talk about limited atonement, we're talking about the spiritual reality, right? We're talking about that on that level. Just like, again, in a sense, we would say, obviously Judas had a direct connection to Christ. Christ literally shares his blood with Judas, right? Because Jesus says, right, this is my blood, and so he has them drink it on the night in which he was betrayed. And so clearly Judas partakes of something, right? Like he is in communion with Christ in some way, but not in the deepest and most important way, right? Like not in the way that over and over Scripture obviously calls people to, even people within that church, within that. And so that's why that like visible invisible church distinction is so important. But Scripture does use that language of there are people who, in some sense, belong to Christ, purchased by his blood, bought by him. Now we have to be able to say that has to be able to mean something other than he died for them in the ultimate sense, right? In the way that we generally use that language, because otherwise we have to accept that, okay, no, some people he truly died for will walk away. Truly died for, again, in the sense that he has completely given them the full and total spiritual reality of what he's accomplished. They are his sheep. But we do, like, it's clear that there are some who have that third category. I'm in connection to him in a certain way. Even, this is why I think the image of Judas is so helpful, because he's there the whole time. He walks with Jesus. He even does ministry with the authority of Jesus, casting out demons and things. And yet he still denies Christ, and yet he still leaves. And so he goes out from us because he was not one of us, right?
I understand.
So that I would just put in a similar category as that. So it's to use the language in different ways, right?
Gotcha.
It's to differentiate those things. But I have trouble knowing how you deal with that otherwise, right?
I'm not sure how I'd wrestle with that. But what I'm hearing you say really clearly is there are different tiers of subscription we can have to the Jesus Bloodline. You can have the $9.99 silver package, which is what Judas got, or the $14.99 gold package, which is what we have. So, okay, that's... No, I'm kidding. Yes. But yeah, no, that is interesting. I'm not sure how to wrestle through that. Yeah. But it does feel weird to me to create this distinction and tier of the efficacy of Christ's blood. Like, to say it doesn't purchase anything for the non-Christian, but for the covenant breaker, there's a degree of purchase happening. It's just not full. Yeah. It makes me feel, I don't know. I have to dig into it.
I just think it's there, right? Like,
sure.
So I think it's...
Well, you got to answer it.
So here's the thing is... if we hold to the 5 points of Calvinism, right? Like total depravity, unconditional election, definite atonement.
Two dip.
Two dip. It's a better, effectual
TM.
calling, effectual calling, and then perseverance or preservation of the saints. Then you come to something like Hebrews 6. It's like how do you reconcile Hebrews 6 with the P? The preservation of the saints, because it's like
what would you say to just like a if you were to look into your classical Wayne Grudem systematic theology on the shelf, or if you look at your ESV study Bible next to it, both of them are going to say, well, the argument that they would make is these are people who are in the church but not truly in the church. So they again essentially using it without the same vernacular, the same idea.
Right.
There's a sense that but that it just indicates that I think that there's a sense in which, again, people are members of the covenant, just like in Israel. We see this all the time, right? There were so many in Israel and the ethnic Jewish nation throughout the Old Testament that were in the covenant community, but obviously did not.
Sure. Yeah, I think for me the challenge just comes down to how we define in the community. Because, like, in my mind, I think it's really easy for me to just say, no, they said they were in the community. The apostate says he's a part of the church, but he's not actually part of the church. Versus, it sounds like what I'm hearing here is, no, they really are a part of the church. It's just it's a different tier. They're a part of the visible church, but not a part of this
Right.
secondary. Which, I don't. Maybe it's all just semantics at this point, because it sounds like they're arguing the same thing. But
It's very similar, right?
Yeah.
It is very similar. I do think that there is a tendency to want to say, well, to define the church as the invisible church, the universal
Right.
church, like those who are truly
the ones who will
spiritually
persevere
speaking, in communion with Christ, who will persevere.
Right.
But to try to say that the visible church today is going to be like that.
Sure.
I think basically to try to say, well, we want to have regenerate church membership is, I think the problem is it's basically an over-realized eschatology, right? It is to say, well, we're in that final day where we can have what it's going to be in heaven, when all things that are invisible are made visible.
And I think you're unwittingly trying to acquire knowledge that only God has, because you're saying, okay, we know that everybody in the church, because they were baptized, believers' baptism, they are actually saved. Where it's like, but only God knows the heart, and how many people have been believers baptized, and
for
have,
sure.
have fallen and have turned away. It's saying like, we can know everyone is truly saved in our churches.
Do you think
Does that
you
make
could
sense?
find a Baptist, like a reasonable Baptist, who would actually say that? I don't think.
No, I don't
that's
think so,
a bit of
but-
a straw man in my mind. Of
Yeah.
I don't think, in my mind, in the circles that I swim, the people asking those questions are able to say, no, we just want to be faithful. We just want to do what we can, recognizing I'm not going to know for sure whether or not you across. I just had a conversation with a woman this week who wants to get baptized, and saying, hey, I know that I can't know for sure, but I do think that it's, and a Presbyterian would agree with this, it's my due diligence that I don't want to baptize you. I don't want you to be a member of our church if, by all reasonable metrics, by all visible metrics, you're not a part of this.
Yeah.
Do you like how I use the word visible there?
Yeah. So this is where the question becomes, right? Who is visibly like who do we take to be a part of that visible people? Is it purely upon personal profession, individual profession, individual life,
right? Yep.
And the fruit of that life, or is there other signs that we're supposed to take that somebody is a part of the visible people of God? Because I think you're right, and I think what Andrew's saying is not to say that anybody maybe specifically believes this.
Sure.
But the logical extension of something like regenerative church membership is, well, you have to, in some sense, be able to guide. Obviously, we know we can't do that. We all agree we can't do that. And so either way, we're taking something.
Just to be clear, outside of children, you would. Your church subscribes to regenerative church membership.
Right. Not regenerative church membership. We subscribe to, if somebody's going to be baptized, they do have to profess faith, right? So we have to take a valid profession of faith for somebody who is outside of the covenant people. The question is just, what do you do with people that are born in the church? They are a part, they're in it in a sense. What do you do with them? Where there's never a point where they are outside of it, right? And so that a lot of this comes down to just what is the nature of the church, and how much of what is visible is also effectual. How much can we speak of these two things in the same way? And I think that's probably why Rhodes starts with look, sometimes when church is used, it is speaking more generally.
Yep.
But it can also mean the specific local visible people.
Right.
And he can speak to all of them as though they are the church.
Right.
Without, sometimes without having met them.
Right.
Right. And so what I think that shows is that there's some kind of clear, effectual connection to the actual visible local people, right? To that church that we have to take seriously, outside of just personal, person where you are at personally or something like that.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. I wasn't saying that.
No.
There's
Yeah.
people
And
that
I
actually
figured-
believe that.
yeah.
I was just saying that logical conclusion that
Right.
we only have regenerate church membership. It's like, well, that's really only right, because there's people within the visible church, even we see in the New Testament, like in 1 John, where it talks about they went out from us, right? So there was a time where they're like, yes, they're in the church, right? They're part of the community, but then we see them leave because then it really indicates they were never truly a part of the invisible church, as it were. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But even for a time, they were in the visible community of believers.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Appreciate you guys both a ton. I do need to roll and rock.
I probably should get going tonight. So.
Well, you guys got to finish the chapter though, otherwise. Unless
I think I got
postpone it to
The Lord's Supper is great.
Partake if you
We
were.
recommend it
Yep.
for those who are baptized and have professed their faith.
But just to be clear, you guys would not allow like a 4-year-old wouldn't be taking communion at a Presbyterian church.
No.
Yeah,
no.
It's only half the
say we
size
don't
of it.
practice paedo.
I'm sorry, I keep on digging.
Right, no paedo communion. No, but this is, it's a good point, right? That the Lord's Supper and baptism are different in that the Lord's Supper is actually a little bit closer to actually what a lot of Baptists think baptism is.
Sure.
It actually does connect to personal profession of faith and regular walking in communion with Christ.
Yep.
And where you have fallen away from
Accountability,
that, there is a point at which you should no longer be able to take the Lord's Supper.
Right.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was huge for me. I'll just make this last point so you can get out of here, Jason. But,
You're good.
Where I was like, it seems to me that baptism, as I'm reading the Bible and kind of coming to like the Paleo-Baptist understanding, is that baptism is something that is done to you, whereas the Lord's Supper is something you consciously partake in. If that makes
Yeah,
makes
so, right.
sense.
There's a both element, right?
There's a
It
both
is
element.
something where God is still speaking and doing something, but
Yeah.
you are involved in a way that you're not in baptism, because
Yeah, yeah.
baptism is always something that happens to you, right? You are baptized. You're passive. You're a
Yeah.
passive recipient.
Yeah.
Whereas when it comes to the Lord's Supper, you take, eat, remember,
Yep.
believe, discern,
Yeah, you have
judge.
an active part to
You
play,
do a lot more, right? You're
Yeah.
much more involved, and so there would be that distinction, right?
Yeah.
But,
No.
Maybe we just do an episode where after we're done with the chapter, we just kind of have all the questions pent up.
That would be great.
from the book.
Great. Well,
and hash it out.
my nail in the coffin argument for which I am still a Credo Baptist at the end of chapter 10's episode is, and this is gonna get all you, John the Baptist, not John the Presbyterian. Lights up. See you guys.
Blessings, brother. Good to see
We'll see
you.
you.
Good to see you, man.
See you, man.
You knew it was coming.
Oh, I love it. It's my favorite.